Well, good morning, and welcome to worship this morning. My name is Adam Hildebrand. I get to be one of the pastors here at LVfirst. It's such a joy to be in worship with all of you here in this place today. If you're new with us this morning, special welcome to you. So glad you're here. So glad you're a part of our worship experience. We love having guests, and we love to get to know them a little bit. We love to hear your story and to have an opportunity to share a little bit of ours and who we are and what we're up to here in Lawrenceville. And there's lots of things going on. Today's a great day to be here. If you're new, you're going to find out, we're going to peel back the curtain a little bit and talk about some of the things that we're doing and some of the ways that we're involved all over the place. Because this last few weeks, we've been asking this really simple question. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Is it worth it to invest our time and our attention and our resources into what God is doing in this world, and more specifically, in this community and in this church? Is it worth it? It's a value question. How much is something worth? And now, if any of you are married, you know that spouses often disagree about how things are valued in terms of the way that we spend our money on certain things. In our household, Michelle and I frequently disagree about whether something is worth the extra dollars and cents it takes to buy a certain item versus not a certain item. This happens most often at the grocery store. If you've ever noticed this, one spouse, when they go to the grocery store, buys certain things, the other spouse buys different things. For us, this has often been around cereal, okay? Michelle really believes in name brand cereal, and so Frosted Mini Wheats, she says, are vastly superior to Frosted Bite-Sized Shredded Wheat. I think that Frosted Bite-Sized Shredded Wheat is just as good as Frosted Mini Wheat. Michelle says not so much. She likes to buy the name brand cereal. I don't really care. And then also in the meat section, she really likes to shop organic, and I really like to shop cheap. Just differences of values. Now, we were talking about this the other day, her and I, and I was like, what's something that I buy that you think is just ridiculous? And she said, all those workout powders that you have in the cupboard? She's like, I think that you spend way too much money on those and that they don't really do anything. It's just something for your brain. It's all in your head. And so we all have values. We all have things that we look at and we say, that's worth the cost. That's worth the cost. That's worth spending some money on. That's worth investing in. Now, I just need to give you a heads up, especially if you're new here. We don't talk about money all the time here, okay? And I know when you come to church, sometimes you think that the preacher's always going to talk about money and that everything that we say is really about money on some level, and that maybe I'm up here running some sort of elaborate multi-level marketing scheme so that I can buy fancy sneakers and get an Instagram profile and have a YouTube following. That's not my deal. I'll confess, I'm uncomfortable when we talk about money. You're uncomfortable when we talk about money. But do you know who wasn't uncomfortable talking about money? Jesus. Yes, that's the Sunday school answer. Good job. You guys all passed the class today. When in doubt, you just say Jesus when the preacher asks you a question. That's the answer. Jesus was not uncomfortable. He was perfectly fine talking about money, because I think Jesus knew something that we sometimes forget. Money is a reality of life, but it can have a stronghold in our lives that we have a difficult time measuring. Money is a reality of life, but it doesn't have to be our whole life. And I'm going to tell you, I am by no means a financial expert. If you want a financial expert to talk to, I will refer you to someone else. Michelle and I have had, in our marriage, we've had seasons where we've been really great with money, and we've had seasons where we argue a whole lot about money. Money is just the way that we do business in the world, but it does something to our brains and to our hearts. And on some level, we don't believe that old adage that, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy you a boat, buy you a truck to pull it. It's my last country song reference for the day, I promise. But in case you're keeping track, in case you wanted to look at the Gospels and see how Jesus talked about money, about 15% of Jesus' total preaching time was talking about money. Because Siri wants to tell me something. Stop it, Siri. Anyway, buy me a better Siri. About 15% of the time, Jesus was talking about money. 16 out of his 38 parables were about money. And Jesus wasn't talking about money so much because he didn't have anything or because he needed everybody's money. Jesus was talking about money all the time because he knew the power that it had in our lives. So many of the great reformers of our days have talked about these ideas around money and how much power it has in our lives. Martin Luther said this once. He said, there are really 3 conversions necessary in our lives: the conversion of the heart, the conversion of the mind, and the conversion of the purse or wallet. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist movement, talked about it this way. He said, money never stays with me because it would burn me if it did. I throw it out of my hands as soon as possible, lest it should find its way into my heart. Somehow our attachment to money and things has this strange thing that it does to all of us. A lot of us think and a lot of us believe that if we just had a little more money, we would be happier. It's like that famous J.D. Rockefeller quote when he was asked how much money was enough. He said, just a little bit more. Which is fascinating because statistically, that doesn't flesh out. Statistically, we find that there's some correlation between money and happiness, but it actually has an end. In this survey done about increase in wages from 1946 to 1989 versus relative subjective well-being, you can see the rise in income versus the flat line of subjective well-being. Some researchers at Princeton took this project up in 2010 to try to figure out what the threshold is for happiness, and they found that about $75,000 of income in 2010 dollars, just I don't understand inflation or all those like numbers, but in 2010 dollars, about $75,000, everything past that didn't really correlate to an increase in happiness. That at some point having more doesn't necessarily make us happier. So what do we do? Because so much of our life is built around the pursuit of money. And I think this question this series gives us a lot to think about. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to pursue money, to get more things, to impress more people, to compare to more things, and to get stuck in this vicious cycle? Or is there another way? Is there a way to short circuit the hold that money has on us and to really think about what it's worth? One of the times that Jesus talks about money comes in Luke chapter 21. And really, this is the tale of 2 stories. If you want to read more about the background of the story, you can read Luke chapter 20, because before Jesus tells us the story that we're going to look at, he begins by looking at some of the religious leaders of the day. And he's talking to the disciples, and he's looking at these people in the temple, and he says, oh, look at the scribes, the guys who interpret the law. Look at them. They love to have long, glamorous robes, and they walk around, and they like to be greeted by name, and they like to have the seats of honor. Jesus is kind of poking fun at these religious leaders and their sense of self-importance and the way that they invested what they had in looking a certain way. It's the New Testament version of Instagram preachers in sneakers. Like if you want to look that up later, there's this Instagram profile where they take pictures of some high-profile preachers and then they say how much their shoes cost. And like some of these shoes that people wear, like excess of $1,000, $30 at Kohl's, right? And I used Kohl's Cash, which may or may not be a scam. But either way, Jesus looks at these guys and he says, there's all these wealthy people who are flaunting it, who are showing off, who want everybody to see them. And then he jumps into this story. Jesus was sitting there with his disciples outside of the temple, and he says he looked up and he saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. They're paying the temple tax. And he also saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. 2 small copper coins, the smallest amount of money available in that time. And he said, truly, I tell you, Jesus says, this poor widow has put more in than all of them. For all of them contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in all that she had to live on. This widow walks up and puts 2 cents into the temple treasury, and Jesus gives his 2 cents on those 2 cents. He wants us to understand that there's something really important about what this woman is doing. He notes that people are there and that some of these people really want to be seen giving money. And can you imagine Jesus and his disciples sitting there off to the side watching everybody giving their offering? Like, that wouldn't be awkward if Jesus was standing at the end of the row when you pass the blue bucket. Just staring at you, making an object lesson out of you. That sounds like a good time. Maybe we'll instruct the ushers to do that next week. No, I'm just kidding. These people who had lots of means, lots of wealth, they're just coming and dropping in just a little bit. This poor widow comes along. And Jesus describes her not just as a widow, but as a poor widow. And in Luke's gospel, the word for poor there can mean monetarily poor, but also some kind of need, any kind of need, really. He uses this in multiple different places, in multiple different ways, because guess what? All of us have need. It may not be the same need as this widow, but all of us have need. All of us walk into this place this morning with need. All of us need something. All of us have needs. In this culture, this widow likely wouldn't have had any kin to take care of her, and so that larger community, that religious institution would have been the place that took care of her. So when she's putting her cents in to the treasury, she's doing it with the understanding that this community would take care of her, that the need that she had would be fulfilled by the group gathered around her, by the religious community caring for her in the way that she was supposed to be cared for, in the way that the Old Testament tells us to care for widows and orphans and aliens and all sorts of people who have all sorts of needs. There are tons of scriptures about caring for the widows in the community. In fact, most of the prophets are about the fact that the people of God are not doing the things that God asked them to do for widows and orphans and people who have all sorts of needs, people just like us. So I think Jesus is making a couple of really important points for us that we need to think through as we evaluate what giving our money to the church is really worth. The first thing is this, that Jesus reminds us with the story that the amount is not what counts. Okay, it's not the amount that counts. Because sometimes we think that's what's really important. We think, I can't give because I can't write a big check. The amount is not what counts. Because what we're really talking about is generosity. We're not talking about an amount, we're just talking about generosity in general. And everybody wants to be generous. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'd like to be a stingy person. Nobody says, I want to be Scrooge. We just don't do that. We want to be generous people. Something in our heart tells us to be generous, but this hold that money has on us turns our attention in different directions. Bishop Robert Barron suggests that when we're trying to discern what God's will or path for our lives is, that we should ask this one important question: which path makes me the most generous? Because generosity is not about an amount. It's not about how much we give. It's about how we give and how big our heart is. See, what we have is not as important as what we do with what we have. And we always think about our wealth in comparative terms. And oftentimes that translates to the way that we give as well. Well, I can't give as much as, so I won't. Jesus says this woman comes with her 2 cents and gives it so freely because of the generosity that lives in our heart. See, sometimes when we think about generous people, we think that generous people are rich people. That's not necessarily true. Generous people are generous people. It doesn't matter how much they have in their bank account. Generous people are generous people. And this is what Jesus is really getting at. Jesus wants to invite us to be generous because it short circuits that hold that money has over all of us. That desire to be seen, that desire to show out, the desire to make sure that everybody knows what we have and to impress them. The second thing I think this story reveals is that generosity is intentional. This widow planned to go to the temple that day. She showed up with the last 2 pennies that she had. She went there with a purpose. She was intentional about what she was doing. And she wasn't trying to be seen. I imagine, she would be mortified if she knew that she was a part of Scripture for all of time. But she was willing to give something that was worth it. It was worth her intentionality. It was worth her time. It was worth the investment of getting there to put those 2 small coins in that treasury. And she didn't think that her gift was too small. She was intentional about it because intentionality changes the way that we do everything. I like the way that author Anne Lamott talks about generosity. She says, whenever I don't feel like I have enough, I give something away. Because it reminds us that when we're intentional about the way that we give, it changes the way that we see everything else that we have. See, generosity doesn't have to be dramatic, but it does have to be intentional. Michelle and I, like I told you, we've not always known what to do with all our money, but we've always made it a priority to give first. The first check of the month goes to the church because it tells all of the rest of our income what's really important. And sometimes it feels like that check is really, really big. And sometimes it feels just fine. But what it does is it prioritizes everything else in our lives. And our intentionality allows us the bandwidth to be charitable in other ways as well. If I give first, I'm more likely to be generous in other places. So when that person is asking for, to buy the card to help out with this charity or this team or this whatever, I'm able to do that because I already know what I've given away. I know what I have because I know what I've given. I've been intentional about planning, budgeting, thinking about where my money goes and what the hold it has on it. It also just frees my heart up to be more generous in other places. It's not just responding in that moment with that person in that place. Planned generosity reminds our heart that money is not the end-all, be-all. This woman shows up with intentionality to give her 2 cents. The last thing that she does, last thing that this shows us about generosity is that generosity is an act of trust. Generosity is an act of trust. It shows who we trust and what we trust. Do we trust money for all of our happiness? Do we trust money to meet all of our needs? Or do we trust God and the community that God has put around us? This widow trusted God and that community for her care. That's why she was able to give those last 2 cents. That's why Jesus looks at her and says, this woman has given so much more. Because she gave her trust to the community. When you give, you're trusting this community to meet needs in all sorts of different ways, in all sorts of different places, with all sorts of different people who have all sorts of different needs. And remember, all of us have needs. And sometimes we get caught up focusing on what we don't have. Greg McEwen, in his book Effortless, talks about it this way. He says, when you focus on what you lack, you tend to lose what you have. But when you focus on what you have, you get what you lack. And what we have is an amazing community gathered around that's doing the work of God. And when we are generous within that community, we find that we get the care that we need in so many different ways, in so many different places. In fact, you're an incredibly generous church. Your generosity allows us to do amazing things. Your generosity allows over 700 people to engage in worship in person and online each and every week. Your generosity has allowed us to connect with new people who are coming to hear about God's grace and God's love made known in this community. Over 100 new members in the last year. Your generosity gives us the ability to impact schools in our community. We served over 685 teachers a meal just to say thank you for what you do, because what you do is difficult. It's complex. It's hard. And so this is a way that we get to say thank you and that we love you and that we're meeting a need in your life. Your generosity allows us to do that. Your generosity allowed us to walk with families. Over 75 families in the Parents First initiative, which represents about 160 kids in this first year of having programming. That we're investing in multiple generations at a time in our community. In addition, we have 30 participants in our Grace Arbor, which is our adult respite care for people dealing with dementia. And it's not just the people who are coming to Grace Arbor, it's the whole family that's being supported, because caregiving is hard. And we're meeting a need because of your generosity. We're equipping families to do the hard work of loving one another when things are difficult. Meeting the needs of people who need food in our community. This summer, 1,980 bags of food were delivered to 400 kids in our community through our summer lunch program. Your generosity made that happen. And as if that wasn't enough, you also gave above and beyond 29,992 pounds of food to the Lawrenceville Co-op. 29,992. I should have just taken 8 pounds of cans over there. I'm really upset that it's not over 30,000. But as a preacher, 30,000 pounds of food, plus your financial donations to make sure that people in our city have the food that they need. Your generosity allowed 18,200 of our closest friends to see God's love and grace at Lawrenceville Lights, Easter Festival, and Candy at the Cabins, our 3 largest community events. 18,000 people. That's half the population of the city of Lawrenceville. Got to see the light of Christ because of you. Out of what you give to the life of this church, we supported a number of ministry partners: the Lawrenceville Co-op, Family Promise, Nothing But the Truth, Habitat for Humanity, Village of Hope, Sleep in Heavenly Peace, Georgia Gwinnett College Wesley Foundation, which is our campus ministry at GGC, Impact 46, Lawrenceville Assistance Project, and a couple of missionaries who are doing work around the world. We were also able to support our local schools when they had a need, provide meals for our football teams and different school and community programs, all to the tune of about $500,000 that went out of the walls of this church into our community to help people who had need, just like we have need. And that $500,000 doesn't even count the money from the grant that we received to do the Parents First initiative. And we're just getting started. And I told you this last week. I want our goals and our hopes and our dreams to be so big that we couldn't do them unless God showed up. And so this year, we set our budget at $2.1 million in order to support the programming that we had planned for this year. But if we want to support our growth, create capacity, and ensure that we're caring for our facility so that we can leverage our facility for the good of the community, we need to do a little bit more. We think that about a $2.3 million budget makes the most sense for us. We want to reach for that, but that will require us to give our 2 cents. All of us. Because you know what we need? We need us. We do. We need us. We need us in order to make a difference. It will require us receiving more pledged offerings than we did last year, and we need each of us to decide that it's worth it to make a commitment to one another, to be people who are generous and intentional, and understand that the amount is not what counts. It's the intentionality. God will bless, do amazing things through that gift. This last year, the average person in the United States gave $884 to some sort of charity. Only about 5% of people who go to church tithe regularly. They give 10% of their income. And last year, Americans gave the lowest percentage of their income to charity since 1995, only 1.7%, according to one giving report. So in other words, we've got some capacity. So as you think about this, I want you to do something real quick. Go ahead and put your hand up. Go ahead and put your hand up. Now I want you to reach a little higher. Oh, did you see that? Did you feel that? It went up a little bit. You got a little bit more to give there. All of us can reach a little higher. We all have the capacity for a little bit more. Now, understand, I'm not asking you to give your last 2 pennies. You know, people say to me all the time, what if I fill out a commitment card and then something happens, like my car breaks down or I got doctor's bills? Like, look, pay your electric bills. Pay your doctor's bills. Do all the things that you need to do. Take care of you. Take care of you. But what I really want you to do is to consider, what's it worth? What's it worth to put Lawrenceville first? What's it worth to connect the church to the community and the community to the church? Is it worth it? Like what Winston Churchill says, that we make a living by what we get, but a life by what we give. And I want to see the next generation see the light of Christ in a way that changes them and changes our community forever. Because we think somehow that the more we get, the happier we get, but in reality, the more we give, the happier we get. And I guarantee you will never miss the money that you give to meet the needs of those around you. It will always be worth it.